PN Vijay, it's a very tricky situation for India to be in. On the one side, Donald Trump keeps saying Prime Minister Modi is my friend. India is very tough. They charge us too many tariffs. And while he makes exemptions for what is politically important for him, like critical minerals and the pharmaceutical sector, he wants India to reduce that USTR, US Trade Representative report, when it spoke of non-tariff barriers, spoke of India having to, they were objecting to minimum support price on food grains, on food products, which are impossible for any government to reduce. So he's being politically expedient himself and pushing India towards the wall on what he thinks is important for American companies. You're dealing with a mercantilist. Mr. Vijay?
Thank you. Good morning. I think we need to dimension this problem without getting too excited about it. We exported about $85 billion of goods last year to the U.S. And if you take away pharmaceuticals and energy products, it works out to about $60 billion. So 25% of that will be about $15 to $20 billion, which is less than 0.5% of India's GDP. So if one is talking about the impact on Indian exports to the US, it is much less than for, say, China, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, or Bangladesh, or practically anybody else. Which is why if you saw the stock market has literally shrugged this off, losing less than 0.5% after the good rise they had yesterday. Now, the bigger issue here is, I think, that what does India do from here? And I think it's a great opportunity for India, because we have a situation where, at least in the headlines, people are worried. Though, frankly, I think a bad monsoon will be much, much more devastating to the Indian economy than this impact on less than 0.5% of the GDP. But there's an impact effect. People are having special shows about it. People are talking about it. So the Indian government can push through what it claims to do, which is ease of doing business, reducing unnecessary procedures, taxes, etc., and which are good for the country. After all, why do we need so many of this? Finally, where is the Indian consumer? People talk so much about the American consumer. What about the Indian consumer? Of course, the Indian consumer stands to gain when these tariffs are down. And I think the mature response of the Indian government was good. It said it is not a setback. We are looking at it. I think we should negotiate with the Americans, and as a policy, bring down the tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the QRs, etc., to make ourselves globally competitive. And I think it can be a win-win for us. And I do not share the views of people who think it is a disaster for India. It is not at all. And I think I take this more as an opportunity to set our...
No, but let me push back, because the thinking in government, PN Vijay, so far was we need to build an Atmanirbhar Bharat. We need to encourage domestic manufacturing, which is why a lot of Indian automobile manufacturers were encouraged to set up plants for for EV cars, EV motorcycles, and they did that. Whether it's the Tatas, the Mahindras, the JSW, several groups did that. Now, suddenly, if you reduce import duties on EVs and Teslas become cheaper, BYDs become cheaper, then all these companies that have spent so much money in building these capacities, hoping to cash in on Prime Minister Modi's Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat push, now because you're trying to cozy up to the likes of Elon Musk and make him calm down, that's very problematic.
Rahul, 95% of cars sold in India are less than 15 lakhs. You think Tesla coming to India is going to affect the Indian automobile industry? Are we joking? You think Bourbon coming into India is going to affect a holiday?
No, but BYD will.
It will
No. BYD will. If BYD can, sir, look at what's happening. No, that's not fair. Look at what's happened in Europe. Look at what's happening elsewhere where Tesla is being impacted. Companies like BYD can sell high tech at low cost. And if they're allowed to if those cars can be imported into India with very low import duties, which is what Tesla is pushing for, you can't make a Tesla specific exemption. If it happens, then it's kind of available to all companies, and that's where the challenges start, and that's a real concern the Indian government needs to look at.
You know, BYD, Hyundai is already there. If you see global prices of Hyundai EVs and BYD, it's almost the same. So we already have Tata's producing the EVs. BYD is very good for the Indian consumer. Why don't we look at it this way?
Sure. Yeah, it's good for Indian consumer. But Siddharth, I want to bring you into this. The fact is, I'm just saying that you've been pushing in one direction. You've been signaling to Indian automobile manufacturers, for example, that double down on Atmanirbhar Bharat, Make in India, and they've done that. They've put in real capacity expansion plans and built up these manufacturing facilities. And now suddenly, because of reasons beyond the control of the Indian government, there is pressure to reduce taxes. And the fact is, if a Mahindra car is competing with a much cheaper BYD car, it throws, for the consumer it's great, but if the companies that have built these capacities, it's problematic.
Well, Rahul, the way I would like to answer this question is that what's the broader picture here, sector by sector? And we are already getting analysis. If we take a look at the markets, pharma stocks up, obviously reacting positively to the fact that pharmaceutical exports have been exempted. We are seeing a broader reaction, as was just mentioned, which is far more mature than the earlier fears of a complete washout. But to your question, for the first two Modi terms, we clearly had a policy of import substitution under the rubric of Make in India. Within the last 3-4 months, we have seen the government of India being completely cognizant and aware of the changing terms of trade that President Trump was going to usher in. And this is just, I think, one of the key chapters of a battle that will continue to play out. Therefore, for the government of India and our domestic producers, the challenge is to move away from relying on tariffs as a tool to get import substitution done. Laptops, mobile phones, electronics, there are so many categories. We have not been able to do import substitution in crude oil or gold for that matter. Several initiatives with regard to reducing our dependence on gold imports have not really succeeded. So the net effect is that we are now almost 35 years after India and Indian companies started to gain from the World Trade Order, a rules-based order of negotiated trade interactions and a global pact. We will now have to move towards bilateral trade agreements. It is every country for itself and every sector for itself. And wherever there are sectors in our economy where, to your point, Rahul, which have been benefiting from the fact that foreigners and foreign producers have been hit with higher tariffs, they will have to pull up their socks. And one final point, I think some of the tonality in what the US is doing has been very unfair to India. And why do I say that? India, in terms of our foreign direct investment rules, is amongst the most open economies in the world. And it is surprising that the USTR has perhaps not fully absorbed that. Compare it with China. We are one of the most open economies, insurance being one of the latest examples. Import tariffs were for protecting our domestic economy. The fundamental error in the US way of thinking is that all companies will move to the US. I think what you have seen, including the most recent rapprochement or signals of that with China, it will be every country fending for itself. And that is going to be the new world trade order after the disorder that Trump has introduced.